My name is Kara Ellison, and I spent 12 years earning the right to stand under that flag. On the morning I was promoted to lieutenant colonel, the air inside the base auditorium smelled of starch, brass polish, and quiet pride. Lieutenant colonel. It was the rank where you stopped organizing and started deciding. It marked the transfer from functionary to command authority. I had rehearsed that moment in my head for months, visualizing the perfect military bearing, chin level, eyes forward, shoulders squared, sealing a moment earned over 12 years. Instead, when the photographer lifted his camera, I heard her laugh. It wasn't loud or obvious, just a soft breath of mockery from the front row. But it landed harder than any shouted insult could have. I didn't move. Years of training kept my chin high and shoulders straight, but inside my chest, something tightened and refused to let go. I could tell the colonel didn't hear it. No one else seemed to. The applause came on cue, followed by the camera's click, sealing the moment forever in a frame that was supposed to mean everything. The only one who knew what really happened was me, and maybe her. She sat there in a cream-colored coat that didn't belong at a military event, her phone half hidden in her lap, chewing gum like a teenager. Her grin said everything she didn't need to speak. To anyone else, it looked like a proud sister smiling for a photo. To me, it looked like victory. She had found her way back into my moment again, quietly, perfectly, and I had let her. When the colonel shook my hand, my palm felt cold despite the warmth of the room. I thanked him, posed for the photo, and smiled just wide enough to pass inspection. Behind that expression was a small fracture, the kind that doesn't bleed, but still stings every time you breathe. I'd thought 6 years of discipline could build armor thick enough to keep her out. Turns out no rank could do that. The truth is, she never needed to raise her voice. Talia always knew how to wound, without leaving visible marks. A glance, a smirk, a small sound in the wrong moment. That was her specialty. When the ceremony ended, people lined up to congratulate me. Fellow officers, old instructors, even a few civilians. My parents hugged me, proud and loud, unaware that their daughters were playing 2 different games in the same room. My mother said, "Your sister looked so happy for you," and I almost laughed, because she didn't see it the way Talia leaned back in her seat, satisfied, watching me pretend not to notice. I've learned to swallow pride in front of cameras. That day, I swallowed my own anger too. Later that night, the text came through. Her name lit up my screen. 5 words, sent privately. "All that for a pin? Major drama. Kara." I didn't respond. I didn't text her. I didn't call. I clicked mute notifications and stared at the screen until it blurred. Looking back, I think that laugh was less about me and more about her. She has always needed to puncture my moments before they could breathe. Maybe because each one proved something she didn't want to admit. That I built a life that didn't revolve around her approval. That I didn't need her to shine. But in that instant, standing under the flag with the camera flashing, all I felt was the quiet humiliation of realizing she still had power over how my story was remembered. It took one more ceremony and one small change on a seating chart to finally take that power back. We grew up in a town called Birch Hollow, tucked in the green hills of Oregon, where summers smelled like cut grass and the county fair counted as the biggest event of the year. Our house sat on a corner lot, with a swing set out back and a porch that always needed painting. Most of my memories from those years come with the sound of my sister's voice carrying across every room. Talia was born to be seen. She had that wild kind of charm that made strangers stop and smile. At 5, she'd stand on the living room coffee table singing pop songs into a hairbrush. And by 8, she was directing shows on our front lawn with the neighbor kids as her backup dancers. I was the one holding the flashlight, or cueing the music on Dad's old stereo. If she was the spotlight, I was the one making sure the batteries worked. At school, teachers said I was responsible and steady. They said Talia was unforgettable. No one meant to compare us, but they did, constantly, like it was harmless. At birthday parties, relatives always said how funny she was, how she lit up the room. I usually heard, "You're so mature for your age," or "Such a good helper." At some point, I stopped trying to compete and just focused on being useful. I figured every show needs someone backstage. Our parents loved us both, but they glowed around her. She made things easy, quick to smile, quicker to perform. I once won a regional spelling bee, and my mom clapped politely, but when Talia got the lead in the school play, she brought cupcakes to her office to celebrate. That pattern didn't change much as we got older. At the holidays, Talia would walk in, toss her coat on a chair, and make everyone laugh within 5 minutes. I'd be in the kitchen refilling trays or cleaning up empty wine glasses. It became second nature, that rhythm of stepping aside without thinking. I don't remember resenting her when I was young. I just thought that was how things worked. Some people shine, and some people support, but somewhere along the way, I started to notice how invisible I'd become, even in rooms where I was the one holding everything together. It wasn't just the big moments, like school awards or recitals. It was in the little things. The way my dad's eyes always found her in a crowd first. The way she never had to ask twice for something, while I learned early to wait. That imbalance shaped me more than I realized. I didn't hate her for it. But I did start to build a world where I didn't need anyone to clap. Where the value of what I did wasn't measured by how loud the room got. The army didn't just offer structure, it offered space. Space away from her spotlight. Space where, for once, I didn't have to dim myself so someone else could shine. I joined ROTC during my freshman year at Oregon State. No one in my family saw it coming. I hadn't grown up around military bases or war stories. But something about the structure called to me. It gave me rules. It gave me a place to stand and something to aim for. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just wanted to feel solid, like I belonged to something that didn't shift depending on who walked into the room. When I told my family, my mom blinked twice, then said, "Well, that's different." My dad asked if I'd lost a bet. Talia said, "Okay, GI Kara, I hope they teach you how to organize a life after you learn to organize a footlocker." She said it like I'd shaved my head on a dare, like it was a costume I'd get bored with. But it wasn't a phase. It was the first thing I chose entirely for myself. I sent her an invitation to my commissioning ceremony anyway. She never RSVP'd. The next day, she posted photos from a weekend getaway in Napa with the caption, "Sistercation, minus the sister." I didn't comment. I just added it to the list. When I earned my first award for logistics innovation during an overseas deployment, I mailed her a photo. She texted back, "Nice medal. Now, can you organize my closet?" That was when I stopped expecting a different version of her to show up. She missed my pinning as captain, skipped my first command briefing, and ignored the email when I told the family I was redeploying to support a disaster zone. There was always a reason. Wrong timing, too far, not really her crowd. After the lieutenant colonel ceremony, I called Mom. "I know you saw how Talia behaved," I said, keeping my voice level. "I just want to know how you felt about her choosing to ruin my ceremony." Mom sighed, a long, familiar sound. "Talia just is Talia, Kara. She needs attention. You're strong. You have to be the one to let it go." I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need her approval, but every uniform I wore still carried a trace of that hope, the kind you pretend you've outgrown but never really do. The auditorium lights hummed with that soft overhead buzz that only happens in government buildings. Rows of metal chairs stretched neatly in formation. Flags stood crisply in their stands, their colors stiff and perfect. I could feel every inch of my uniform, the starched collar against my neck, the tight pull of the jacket across my shoulders, the weight of the new insignia waiting to be pinned. I had rehearsed my salute, my stance, even the brief smile I'd allow when the photographer signaled. I knew where to look, how to hold still. What I couldn't plan for was the sound. As the photographer raised his lens, just before the shutter clicked, I heard it. A laugh, not loud, not mocking in the way you could call out. Just a soft exhale of amusement. Breathy, and sharp, like the punchline of an inside joke only she understood. My body didn't move, but my jaw tensed. Barely. Enough that I knew she saw it. Enough that I knew she'd be pleased. My name echoed over the PA system. The colonel stepped forward with my new rank in hand. He pinned it to my chest with practiced precision, and I returned his salute with all the pride I could muster. The audience clapped. My parents beamed from the third row. And Talia sat there in a white trench coat, crossing one leg over the other, chewing a piece of gum like we were waiting for a table at a restaurant. The camera clicked. 1 second. One image. The moment was sealed. It would be posted to the brigade's bulletin before the day ended. A photo of honor, of discipline, of achievement. And in the center of it, me. Perfect posture, clean lines, chin lifted, eyes steady. But inside, everything ached. That laugh had cracked something I had worked so hard to fortify, not because it was loud, but because it was so quiet, so precise. She knew when to strike. She knew how to ruin the moment without ever drawing attention to herself, and she did it with a smile. After the ceremony, I thanked every person who shook my hand. I smiled for selfies with junior officers. I hugged my parents. I posed for another group photo, this time without the weight of the medal still new on my chest. Through it all, Talia floated in the background, waving at people she didn't know, taking photos of the flag with her phone, whispering something to our mother that made her laugh. By the time I made it back to my quarters, the photo had already been posted. It was captioned the usual way. Congratulations to Lieutenant Colonel Kara Ellison on her well-earned promotion. I looked at it on my screen for a long time. Not because of how I looked. I knew the stance was right. I knew the regulation details would pass inspection. I looked at it because I could still hear her laugh in my ears. Then I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen until it blurred. There wasn't anger. Not the hot kind. It was something colder, cleaner, like a wire snapping inside a locked door. Something shifted that night. I realized I'd spent years letting her orbit every moment that should have been mine. I had treated her behavior like weather, something to brace for, something I couldn't control. But the truth was, I had options. I had structure. I had command. And for the first time, I was ready to use it not just on the field, but in my life. I wasn't going to beg her to show up differently. I wasn't going to hope she'd evolve. I was done holding space for her in moments. She only came to interrupt. The next time I stood for a photo, she'd be there too, just not where she could reach me. The seating chart was just another task in a long list of pre-ceremony details. I was sitting in the operations tent with a clipboard, reviewing names and placements like I'd done a dozen times before. Everything was laid out by protocol. Command staff in the front, civilian guests in designated sections. Neat, predictable, until I saw her name again. Talia Ellison, Row 1, Section A. It was typed there like it belonged. Like nothing had happened. Like the last ceremony hadn't been chipped apart by a 5-word comment that still sat in the corner of my memory, sharp and untouched. I didn't flinch. I didn't sigh. I just stared at it for a beat longer than necessary. Then I moved her. Row 5. Far right. Civilian overflow. No explanation. No second guessing. I didn't ask anyone. I didn't tell my mother or run it by the protocol officer. I just made the change. My handwriting is steady. My choice is clear. There was no anger in the stroke of my pen, just clarity. I wasn't removing her from the picture. I was removing her from the center, from the space she always managed to take without ever asking. This time, she would still be there, but not close enough to steal the moment. For years, I'd kept making room for her. I told myself it was grace. That family meant letting things slide, but that wasn't grace. That was surrender, and I was done surrendering. Not every decision needed to be announced. Some lines are drawn quietly, with intention, with rank, with a clipboard in hand, and the name was moved 5 rows back. The morning of the joint command ceremony was cool and sharp, the kind of air that made boots feel tighter and flags crisper. Folding chairs were lined up with exact spacing, name cards already taped down, and the microphone had been tested 3 times before I arrived. Every corner of the field reflected precision, down to the starch in the uniforms and the angle of the command banners. I checked the printout one last time before stepping into place. Talia was listed, row 5, far right. Not a single adjustment had been made since I marked it. She would see it exactly how I intended. Not erased, just placed accordingly. She arrived late. 20 minutes after call time, her heels clicking down the walkway like she was walking into a gala. She wore oversized sunglasses and a navy coat tied tight around her waist. When she scanned the rows, her expression tightened. She searched for her seat in the front, like she always had. But this time, it wasn't there. She gestured to our mother, whispering something, full of hands and disbelief. Our mother didn't budge. She stayed seated. I watched it all from the dais, without turning my head. The photographer called for attention. I didn't shift, didn't smile yet. I kept my eyes on the flag and held steady. The camera clicked. In that frame, I stood center. Calm, grounded, unmoved. My shoulders are back, chin level. Talia was barely visible, a blur at the edge of the lens. Half-turned, caught mid-frown, a sliver of presence without center stage. I could have walked over to her afterward, said something easy, smoothed it out. But I didn't. Not out of spite, but because some distances are necessary. Some boundaries have to be seen to be respected. And for the first time, I didn't just claim the space, I kept it. I received a package the following week. No card, no note, just a new military-grade field compass. It was expensive, the kind that held its calibration perfectly. She didn't buy me things. She must have asked Dad what a real officer would need. It was a clumsy, silent olive branch that missed the mark entirely, but it showed she was trying to calculate my value. It showed up 4 days after the ceremony. No return address, just my name typed on a plain envelope, slipped under my door with the evening mail. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. I didn't open it right away. I didn't want the weight of her admission to disrupt the quiet control I had just achieved by changing the seating chart. I waited because this time, I would not let her decide the moment I received her feelings. On the 4th night, I slid a nail under the seal and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Her handwriting was unmistakable. Loopy, familiar, like middle school birthday cards and shopping lists stuck to the fridge. She didn't apologize. She didn't mention the photo, or the laugh, or the seating chart. What she wrote instead was quiet. You always looked like you knew where you were going. Even when we were kids. That scared me. It still does. I sat down slowly, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. She said it was easier to joke than admit she never had a plan, that I had always had a spine, and she didn't know how to stand next to it without feeling smaller. So I made you smaller instead. I read the last line twice. I don't know what to do with that, but I see it now. No signature, just space. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of my field journal, behind a tab marked personal. It didn't erase the years. It didn't undo the moment she had stolen, or the silence I had swallowed. But it made one thing unmistakably clear. She hadn't hated me. She had envied me. And somehow, that felt heavier. Because knowing she didn't hate me didn't mean she ever knew how to love me either. The deployment orders came through on a Tuesday morning, folded neatly in a standard manila envelope. 6 months forward assignment. Nothing unexpected. I'd been on the short list. Still, seeing it in writing always settled something deep in my chest. The admin sergeant handed me a packet and pointed to the last page. Emergency contact update. Just 3 blank lines. I had filled out the same way for years. Without hesitation. Without thinking. I stared at the form longer than I meant to. My pen hovered. Then it moved. For the first time in my career, I didn't write my sister's name. Instead, I wrote Captain Elise Tran, my second in command, the one who knew my routines, my silences, my thresholds, the one who showed up without noise or demand. I signed the form, folded it, and handed it back without looking up. No announcement, no explanation. Just a quiet choice made in the margin of a long day. It didn't feel harsh. It felt accurate. Family, I'd come to understand, isn't who fills the photo albums. It's who holds the line when it counts. And some ties, no matter how old, simply don't hold weight anymore. The sun was low over the outpost, casting long, quiet shadows across the compound. Dust hung in the air like a memory. I stood near the perimeter, boots still coated from the morning inspection, hands in my pockets, watching the light stretch and fade. A courier handed me a small envelope just before the final radio check. No name, no base stamp, just a familiar loop of handwriting. Inside was a note. One line. Thank you for holding the line. I read it twice, then folded it without sighing or smiling. It didn't shake me. It didn't need to. I tucked it into the back of my field journal, between inventory tallies and scribbled quotes from commanders past. I didn't feel a door closing. I felt space. Real, earned space. Not empty, just clear. She was still there, just not where I used to keep her. And I was still me, only quieter, stronger, and finally, mine.